Hello, everyone. Just want to thank you for joining us here today on this webinar about selecting the slots of the future, but a lot of other really interesting topics. I'm Tom Wood. I'll be moderating this. I'm the CEO of Raw iGaming. Have been the CPO for SG and Chief Creative Officer for SG Digital before it became Light and Wonder. Joining me today is John Parsonage. He is the founder of Rogue, Play Rogue, a new, really interesting studio, building some really innovative games. But he's also got a lot of experience, even on the B2C side with Ladbrokes and also with SG. We also have Mark Siegel, who is the CFO of Gaming Realms for close to 10 years now, Mark, I think. And was with Cascade before that. And lastly is Simon Hammond. We all know Simon from NetEnt, CPO at both at Relax and NetEnt, and now congratulations, recently becoming the CEO of Relax. Super. These guys are going to hate me for this, but combined, we've got some 60 plus years of gaming experience, which kind of dates us a little bit. But thanks for joining. I want to start this off today with you, Mark, because I think you represent a lot of kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And that's, Slingo is very non-traditional content. And I know that you, as a new studio and bringing something innovative to the market, some years ago, probably had a very interesting journey and a bit of a struggle. And I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit how you started with a non-traditional content that maybe not many people understood, and was able to deliver a successful adoption of that. So that'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, that's right. We've actually been working with this Slingo content since 2015, and we now have a portfolio of over 50 games, and we're now distributing to over 100 partners in regulated markets around the world. What we wanted to look at, or where we've come from, particularly my original history in the bingo space and then moving into the casino space, is something which is not quite traditional, something which is engaging for players. And we very much started from there. Of course, taking something new to market, you have to work through trying to explain what that is, how, our innovation there was misunderstood at first. And we can sometimes, you can start off being pigeonholed with saying something's niche. But I think we've proved that actually that's not the case with where we are now. And it's not just the innovation in the product itself. It's the account management team, the marketing we've been done. It's taking time to work with our partners over the years. Behind that, we have our own RGS platform. And we've also invested a lot of money into that. And that's allowed us to distribute, but also to get the data we need to explain to partners and people we want to be working with. In fact, even brands we've been licensing in, because the Slingo mechanic, we've been very successful licensing other slot brands in and working with partners with studios, as well as TV brands, for example, Shark Week from Warner Discovery, etc. And then we use that data to essentially a feedback loop on the games we're producing, but also to try and explain where our games can really help in terms of acquisition and retention of sort of players for the operators. And then lastly, we're hoping that our games can be international. The mechanic can be. Yes, we have to localize. Yes, we need to look at the right mechanics and brands for markets, but it's all within Slingo. And again, a lot of investment in there for the license we're getting, the regulation, the certifications, and that's become a big operation. Now, we are probably 3 or 4 to 5 years in this journey now, so it's very different to now where we started. Where we started was very much UK first, and then into New Jersey, and slowly but surely we've been able to build and reinvest to where we are today.
And for studios out there or that are maybe looking for non-traditional content, I mean, what's your kind of advice to them? I mean, I'm sure there's, do you need a lot of money behind you to be able to do it, or is it too risky, or is how big is education as a piece to that? And
I think education is the big one. I mean, if you have the skill set and the money to be producing a game, and also a route to market with an operator, which is very important. There are several routes to market. There's great partners, for example, Relax, you can work with, and things like that. Simon's on the call, but lots of choice there. But if you can go and speak to an operator, maybe it's someone who's there to champion you, you can work with and use that data to start to improve the product and work more and see how your product can work for that partner in terms of their player cycle, and then that can roll out to more partners again. And I think if you do get a game which works well, there's a lot of competition on the operator front, and people want to be publishing the best content they can, and hopefully that means you can start to work with more and more partners.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned something about brands, which I think is really interesting, because I know that brands are really popular, specifically in U.S. land-based. You can't walk into the casino without seeing tons of brands, and we've all historically worked with brands online. I would love to get all of your guys' kind of viewpoint on, are brands something that we should continue with, or is it just used as an acquisition tool and then you really don't get the value out of it, or kind of what are your guys' viewpoints on it?
I can.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure, like many of you on the call, that we've all worked with brands at certain points. I was always very pro brands, especially in the European landscape. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I did sort of the Guns N' Roses and South Parks and Aliens and all that kind of stuff. Always fun to do. They do create noise. They do get operators' attention, and it's a good talking point, good justification point. And the acquisition argument was always underpinning that. But that's when the competitive landscape was very different 4 or 5 years ago. You can beg the question, who are you acquiring for? Not to go into too much history here, but it will always, the argument of cross-selling your own product using branded content as an acquisition tool work fantastically when you could command that chain of events. It would work very well with a Slingo brand, as an example, because of course you have a Slingo product and the likelihood is that you want to play a Slingo product. Yeah. But if you're acquiring players to go and play a competitor's product, that's not really ticking the right boxes, right? So I've actually, in recent times, actually shied away from it. I find that the ROI doesn't meet the demand and also the justification of doing it. It's also very difficult to get the expectation right of the product and also capture VIP players on a branded content and make that a profitable product. If you get a great game plus a great brand, you have pure magic. Don't get me wrong.
Well, Simon, there's something to add to that. There's a product, and then there's the brand, but the product needs to fit the brand. And quite often, you find that people apply a brand to just a slot, and you may have some sort of bonus round that has some sort of affiliation with what the actual brand relates to, but there's not really been a product in the market, what I've seen in the market, where they've really utilized the brand format, such a, other than, I guess, Wheel of Fortune may be an exception to that, but there's numerous examples of brand usage where they've just branded a slot. Players come to the slot, the slot basically has the brand on it, has no, real reflection of actually what the brand's about. Players play the game for half a dozen spins, realize it's just a brand, and migrate away. And I think that's always been the problem, and that's why the return on investment is never, in my experience too, has never really sort of justified it.
I've always seen it as a studio marketing cost in many respects. It's a way of being seen, a discussion with the operators, an excuse to talk to the operators. I can actually see that there is some currency for young studios, small studios, to take a risk, to elevate them above the noise, to create some visibility. I can definitely see the value there. But for well-established studios with a deep distribution, you would think that the economics would make more sense. But personally, for Europe, I'm not saying for US, but for Europe only, I personally don't believe in the numbers to make that viable. Maybe just from the productions I've done, but there have been some good ones in there. But I still don't think it makes that much sense.
And that's another point there. And Mark, you probably have the best view of us all here. Is like, if you look at the U.S., you walk into a casino, they're everywhere. You can see very clearly if you look at the numbers that omni-channel games are doing very well there. Does that mean that branded content maybe works better in the US than Europe? And you would have probably the best kind of view on that.
So I suppose we're in a slightly unique position in that we have a game which is not a traditional slot game. It's almost its own genre or category in itself. And so that has enabled us to work with some slot providers and slot studios. I can say that we have licensed both land-based content and land-based slots, online slots. Both do very well in the US market. We've also been able to use some non-casino brands as well, which have worked well in a different way for acquisition, which we talk about ROI for the studio. It's still something which may be important for the operators. And of course, the way we like to work is we want to have a partnership with everybody we're working with. And sometimes it's important to be doing that, whether, they're able to use what we're producing to help acquire players for the casino. That's also good for them and for us. But yeah, we are certainly. I do see the advantage of that. I think when you're actually in a casino and land-based, again, I've not worked in that side of it, but I imagine that these big brands are good because you've got people in for a short amount of time, maybe a day or 2 days, and so they really grab you if you associated with something, and that can work when people sign up for casinos online as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some examples of brands that are casino brands as well, Mark. So so there are good examples of brand collaborations between studios, which have probably worked quite well from what I've understood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Mark, for you, John, for you've just more or less started a new kind of studio, and you've made the decision to, kind of do more innovative, like kind of really crazy casino mechanics that are really, we know that there's complex math behind there. So could you just tell me a little bit about, your journey and how you kind of made that decision to do that, and why you're taking a risk on doing a little bit more innovative stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that myself and my other two co-founders, Dan and Phil, we all really, we're gamblers at heart as well. We love the industry and we love games, but we also feel there is a complete lack of innovation and there's so much opportunity. I mean, between us, we have ideas and we come up with some crazy ideas, as you've seen, and then we put them together and we produce some decent games from it. But our biggest issue right now is because our games are quite unique and very innovative, it's also very complex. So our biggest issue is really about distribution. So if when we started, we didn't have our own platform, we didn't have our own RGS. So our biggest issue was working with other aggregator platforms and aggregator platforms having to build our engines on our behalf. And that was really hard because they weren't really, we found they weren't capable because of our engines were so complex. So we found that a struggle. So we tended to try and partner with people who would allow us to build our engines ourselves and control that piece. We're effectively a front and back studio. So our biggest, I guess, was distribution, and to some extent it still is. We've since launched our own RGS. We've built an RGS in sort of 12 months or so. We're now going through the pain of licensing that and what have you. So, but distribution, and also the cost of distribution. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to licensing and certification later on, but the cost to get a game out into the market, into as many key markets as possible, probably costs us as much as it does to develop a game. And that has to change. I mean, there must be a better solution to this. And I'm sure we're not the only studio who feeling that pinch. Mm-hmm. But that's probably one of the biggest issues. So there's the cost. And I guess the other point is that as we're a new studio, we don't have any recognition. We don't have any sort of proven game formats. So you go to an operator, you want them to push your content, and the first thing they do is, well, we'll push it, but we're going to have to do it at a reduced price, or we're going to have to put, X amount of marketing into it, and it's going to cost that, and therefore it's going to come off the bottom line. So in order to give your game a good chance in the market, you basically have to sell it for a very low price, hope that the operator gives it a decent push. 9 times out of 10, they probably don't. So you're being attacked from two fronts really. Prices being reduced, cost is increasing. We are fortunate that we've got a very capable and a relatively small team that can build very well, very quick. So our cost to develop a game is low to be compared to others. But yeah, the distribution piece is a struggle. The cost certification is expensive, overly expensive, and the price is getting lower and lower. I mean, it's contradiction when the operators are often saying to you, we want innovation, we want something different, we want something stand out, yet they're not willing to pay for it, and then ultimately not willing to really back it.
Well, I mean, that helps us jump the gun a little bit, but I think we're all seeing some of that, and I think it brings up a good question about the fact that innovation. We don't see a ton of innovation, and this might be one of the drives of that, because it becomes too risky for studios to kind of try new things, and we're trying to do that at Raw, and it is very, very challenging. So do we have any kind of like ideas, any of us? So how should operators be supporting us in innovation? I mean, I can get that maybe a standard game might be something different, but when a studio comes to an operator with something really new and innovative, how can the operator support the studio with that specific content?
I guess that's a good question for an operator, right? But it's I think the first thing an operator can do is objectively look at their portfolio, look at their supplier base, and ideally look at those suppliers who are actively making efforts. I think that's the first step, right? I mean, efforts in their content, efforts in their production quality, efforts in their licensing and certification procedures. We're upwards of hundreds of game studios now. That's huge amounts of competition, huge amounts of volumes. Most operators are launching anywhere between 70 to 150 games a month. When we launch a game, we all face the same problem. It's the best one in the world. You're washed out of a lobby within 1 or 2 days. You've got 2-day visibility to a player. That wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago. Of course, an operator has to be sensitive as well to their bottom line. Ultimately, they don't want to pour their tight budgets and marketing into a risky product that may or may not fly. Most products won't, let's be frank. But if they do, it's gold, and they will double down on it. So there needs to be enough window. I think it's twofold, really. I think it's fair for an operator to take a chance. I don't think it's fair to command huge marketing spends and massive pushes. But one thing I do think is fair is give it just a little bit longer in the shop window. Just a little bit longer in the shop window, not to let it fall down out of a lobby just because of release placements within the first day or two. I think some unique products need that extra airtime, need that player visibility, need a couple more days just to see if it is going to fly. And I think secondly is, if we all want to run down the rat race of launching so many games, so many clones, copies, inspirations all for a lower price, that's okay short term. I understand the economics from an operator perspective, but ultimately,
oh, looks like Simon's gone. So I think I can just carry on from what Simon was saying. I think, it's important that the operator, if the operator says they want innovative content, when we give them innovative content, they need to categorize it and also present it on their site and give it a fair chance. But I also think there is also a bit of a mismatch. These operators, when they go, to acquire customers, they use traditional standard slots usually. They use the megaways, the book ofs to acquire the players, and that's the sort of play you're getting. I think it needs to the innovation piece needs to start from the grassroots, and effectively the operator needs to say, this is what we're going to go for, these are the types of games, this is the type of player we want, and use those games to acquire customers, because therefore you're more likely to get the right customers to give those games a right chance, the fair chance and decent performance. So I think it actually starts from that acquisition point, and that's where I guess the cost for the operator is high, but the reward is significant. So, but I've not seen that yet, and I've heard talk of it, I've heard rumor of it, but I've not actually seen it. I've not seen it yet. Hopefully that's something we'll see in 2023.
I mean, just from the studio, I'm sort of a bit like Simon on this because I could only control the world that we're in a studio, but it's a small studio. But what we've done over the years is we didn't start by making lots of games. We wanted to make good games, and then slowly, as we've been able to reinvest, we've been able to build our portfolio. And we're still not building mass market, building Slingo and other products. We want to make sure what we get is correct. And early on, we wanted to try and work with the operators we thought had the right demographics for the product we're making, because again, we're more likely to have success in that respect, because it's not an operator. There's hundreds of operators in different markets and with different demographic of players. And then as we've got bigger, we've tried to build more products and or more variations which can appeal to the different demographics. But again, that's come with a lot of hard work and time, and also development time, innovation, but also time with our partners to try and learn and get the feedback.
So we lost you there, Simon, and I think everybody was kind of like in agreement with you and what you were saying. And John kind of offered up the idea that maybe operators could have a specific kind of like innovation tab or something like that, where the games could be extended for a period of time, so players get a little bit more chance to play them than maybe one day in and one day out.
Because there's a journey of discovery there for the player, and I think just by virtue of bundling it in with the volume, it doesn't get that airtime. I think that's a way of celebrating or embracing. And if I'm an operator and even a supplier, it's the thing that we crave today is just shop visibility. We know the impact that has. And we obviously get frustrated as game developers when we're competing against the plethora of competition who we know from a studio point aren't putting the effort in, or it's a lazy approach, and we go, well, hang about, we've spent X, we've developed Y, it's passionate, and then we're competing against Z right next door, right? So we have to be sensible, and we have to ask a reasonable demand, but I think a little bit of a longer shop window for innovative products in a clever way that makes sense for the operator, I think is healthy for all. And if you hit gold and there's something there, it's not only fantastic for the studio, but to be honest, it's fantastic for the operator and the business, because it will spawn other ideas. It will start, people make 20 iterations of that, and then you get a whole new genre and so on and so forth.
So I think there's a good point in that, I think because of, what I think is kind of becoming the commoditization of slots, I like to envision it as a US cereal aisle. And you walk down that cereal aisle, there's 250 different versions of cornflakes. They're all just cornflakes. It's just different packaging. And, I really don't want to see us as an industry get there. I do like this idea of differentiation. But if you're just packaging and throwing everything in there the same as everything else, that kind of differentiation is lost. So it would be really interesting to, hear in the future how the operators, would look at that and maybe do something to help support us. I think also for you, Simon, I kind of wanted to ask you, because you're at Relax, you have so many different elements. You've got the aggregation side and the platform features, and you've got the your own really successful content. I love Dream Drop, by the way. So, I'd love to hear from you, for a new studio coming in, and how important is aggregation for them? And, is that the way to go for the future? And get your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's a big question. I've been developing slots for the best part of 15 years and hundreds of games in that sense. And I'm glad Relax sort of was 4 or 5 years ago really putting its foundations down at this turn of the market. In one sense, I would say it's the toughest environment for a new studio than ever before. As John rightly pointed out, there are more costs, there's more competition, and so on and so forth. At the same token, it's never been easier for a new studio entrance than ever before, because there are aggregators and there are systems in place that can help tick some of the boxes that are barriers to entry. 5-6 years ago, a small studio could never have really dreamed about reaching 100, 200 customers on one game. That opportunity didn't exist. So there are studios out there, young, small, who are doing their first game, second game, third game, who are really making waves, getting reputation, making meaningful distribution, and starting to build their business in a structured way. Do I think that aggregators are the answer? I mean, I should say yes, but ultimately, I think we're a necessary evil to some degree. Not saying we're evil, but we control, or we give the keys to certain doors. We make our lives for the operators easier because we control the content flow. We're one integration point. We make the legal process and financial process and all these things quite swift for the operator to make those content choices as well. So I feel that aggregation is here to stay. I do believe for young studios, you need to be in tune with the technical capacities that they have. That is obviously always a question. Some of them are great, but they're fantastic game designer with an art team, but have no backend, no Java devs, no server, no maths. They have a totally different need to a RGS owner who just wants to reach a broader distribution point. So I think if you're an aggregator, you need to be catering for talented teams with a wide need, commercially and technically. That's the aggregator part. I still feel there's a great opportunity for top casino content. I think your mindset around a roadmap now, though, is very different as a game supplier producing slot-specific content. You build a roadmap very much with the year in mind now, I think, and a certain volume, and you hope that 2 or 3 of those games within a period of 12 to 24 games in a year have stickiness, have interest. Some guys are pushing out the clones, the book ofs, the same old, but the reality is that will not compound their revenue point. It's short-term revenue cash flow. You need something to stand out. You have to take a risk at some point for you to elevate your business, to have the long-term cash flow to grow your business. We were lucky, I'm going to plug a few of my own games, but we were lucky very early that with Relax, we had Temple Tumble. And that was our 3rd or 4th game. And that really gave us the platform to invest. And then we had Money Train 2, and others that came along. But we had those early hits to be able to compound, and there were risks at those points. And I feel like if you want to just keep the lights on, then to do the clones. But if you actually want to grow as a business, you've got to take a risk. And you're going to have to do that quite consistently to be able to be a brand of the future. To be honest.
Really good advice. Just talking about the future there, nice segue. One thing that's I'm kind of passionate about, and I've talked about this before, is if we're looking at the future and our future player and the people that are coming of age, and they've been a very difficult, we talk about the millennials and such, and they've been a very difficult segment to kind of crack. We know that people spend about 9 hours a week binging on Netflix, as an example. I think an average spend of a youth on social media is somewhere around 2.5 hours a day, and I think the average video game sessions is about 1 hour and 22 minutes. And an average session on a slot game is 12 minutes. So how do we compete with that going forward? Because we are going to be competing with the TikToks and the YouTubes and everybody else going forward. So how do we kind of move our industry more in a direction that might allow us to survive long term? And a lot of I hear a lot of studios saying, oh, they'll come, they always have come. But there's a big difference between now and before. Before, everybody wasn't walking around with the 24-hour entertainment machine in their hand that's always connected to everything else. So I do have, I would like to kind of ask you guys, what's your thoughts on that in the future, and how do we compete against what I see as really kind of the bigger competition in the future than worrying about another studio?
Well, I think it comes back to the point about innovation, really. From my point of view, if the game's innovative and it can focus on the entertainment piece, and doesn't necessarily require, if a game can be a gambling game, but doesn't necessarily need to require the player to gamble huge sums of money. If you can focus on the entertainment piece, retain that player for as long as possible, and get, focus on value, long-term value, I think we can start to attract those players. And maybe it's working with the likes of the social media brands, as opposed to against them, and using them to sort of influencers and what have you to help get associated with your product and your brand, and make it more along the lines of entertainment.
I think there's been a lot of discussion over this topic. Appealing to the millennial, that's a topic sort of 4 or 5 years ago, but we all know the demographics that tend to be the highest spending percentage. Changes in different markets, of course, but we appeal largely to a 30 to 40-year-old demographic. In short, that naturally we now want to think about what is the 20 to 25-year-old, not maybe perhaps in terms of revenue at this point, but what is the needs of those people, and where what are they going to migrate to? Are they going to still be interested in gaming content, gambling content, and the products that we produce? I think that there's no one clear answer. I think there's a lot of operator responsibility in terms of how they feed, how they service a player in terms of choice. There is a lot of talk there about following the Netflix model and the lobbies and all that kind of side of things. But ultimately, as producers, we could. The quality of the production, I think, generally is going to have to increase dramatically. That is just a base level, youthful expectation. They will not accept cheap looking graphics, cheap looking animation, so on and so forth. Naturally, we also as a studios have to be quite in tune with tech. Not that we say we need to be market leading or jump into the next tech innovation, because that's where you can lose a lot of money as well and time. But we need to be mindful of the trends there and the devices and how that can shape our own game design. And thirdly, I think there is a question mark over, is that more bite-sized type production, quicker, faster, or is it more immersive? Is it more deeper levels? And actually, perhaps we all end up doing 1 or 2 productions a year, not 20, 25 in that sense. That's to be said. I think whilst there is still a increase in general health of unique player base coming through to the operator, then the status quo will remain for the time being. But I think once that unique player base starts to dwindle because of a generational gap, then ultimately the pressure on us to make either bigger, longer, deeper productions, more immersive worlds and gambling worlds and all those types of things might all start happening. But that's going to come at a huge cost, and that will blow a lot of small studios out the water. Short answer is I don't know, Tom. We have to see. We're all guessing here.
Yeah, we all are. But I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that nowadays slots are quite complex. There is quite. It seems to be a bit of a barrier to market when you've got 20-year-olds who are used to just look at something for 5 seconds, and if it doesn't grab their interest, they swipe up. So I think maybe slots aren't the answer, and maybe it needs to be something else, something that's the crash games, tap games are good examples of that, where players can instantly see the product, know exactly what it's about, press a button, and then they're involved. And maybe that's the way to get those type of players into the industry.
I think it does lead in or loop us back to a topic about innovation, actually, and exactly what you just said there, John, about what we are seeing very clearly is the average spins per player per product is obviously dwindling. That's naturally because of competition. One of the things that's absolutely front and center now is this period or discovery journey that a player has. Years ago, you were afforded 120, 130, 140 spins to get the player experience and for them to discover the product. Now you've got to deliver that potential so quickly, so clearly, within a very small period of time. And that pure essence of that is almost at odds with deeper, bigger innovations, more complex products. So you've got a consumer that wants things to understand things extremely quickly, but what isn't afforded because of visibility, the lifetime on the lobbies, and then you've got a player behavior that perhaps doesn't want to spend now 100, 200, 300 spins just to experience the product. So we have a challenge there to innovate, but also deliver the value so clearly, so dynamically, faster than ever before. So more complex, but simpler at the same time. It's
I mean, I come back again. It's the demographic you're trying. I mean, we've had great success with our games in the sense that they're longer. You know, they're 90-second games and they're a bit more interactive during that time. It's slightly different to the traditional 3-second slot game, for example. But that doesn't mean we're not still going to innovate and look at other products and think, well, okay, there's still a big market for people who like more traditional looking slots, and is that an area we can be innovating in ourselves? And you know, then there's bingo and there's multiplayer and there's lots of areas where people can go for, and maybe because of that, I mean, I guess the whole point of the original question, Tom, around Netflix and social media and etc. is just that I guess what you're trying to say is gambling's another form of entertainment for people, and it's we've always got to share with that. And I guess there's always been, one area is, I mean, it's off topic here, is people are probably going to the cinema less, and so they're spending their time on the streaming more and stuff. So it's all part of the bigger pie, and it's how engaging we can be to the people we want to, and the players we want to be engaging with. And that's where we need to work hard. I guess we're not publishing the games, you know, we're producing them to work with the operators to you know, the right operators to do that.
And is that responsibility maybe partly or more on the operator side, that there's so many operator sites that look very similar, and maybe the operator needs to move to a more, you know, I don't know, fanciful type of presentation or something that creates a better experience for the player? Or
I mean, I don't know. It's not even how they look. I mean, operators all manage the players differently and very sophisticated with data and how they want to speak to their players. I don't want to speak on behalf, but you know, they all.
But I think it comes down to the acquisition piece, which I mentioned earlier. I mean, if they really want to be innovative, they need to know exactly what they want, the type of customer, the type, you know, demographic, etc., and then they need to target it. And so it needs to be start from that initial acquisition point, so they're getting the right players in. And I think that what we're talking about, people, you know, do watch more Netflix and what have you, but at the same time, they tend, well, I don't know about you, but from my experience, most people are on their phone as well as watching Netflix. So maybe innovation and that simplicity is key there. So maybe the game doesn't need to be all singing, dancing, 3D graphics and what have you, but it just needs to be engaging, simple, but fun. You know, something that they can do whilst they're doing something else.
I think it puts more pressure in the short term, at least while this is happening, to deliver higher value, at least in any context, higher value from the production part. And I think the player will start to demand higher value, mechanically, visually, you know, whatever facet it might be, but it needs to be higher value product.
Yeah. What about things like and we actually have a question here from Richard that kind of touches on this as well. But what about promotional mechanics and platform tools and things of that sort? How important are they to us and to this kind of question?
Personally, I think they can be extremely important. Promotional tools have, in essence, if you look at some of the top titles on the market historically, yes, they've been great games, but they've also been heavily become brands in their own right by virtue of the promo tools of the operators or the systems behind them. Without marketing, without pushing, without visibility and promotion, a product needs to be discovered. So I would say the power to a studio and the promotion is imperative. I would say one of the biggest challenges the industry has is actually just down to fragmentation. There is, you know, and we can all come up with the best thing, best promo tool, but unless there's a harmonization of use, unless there is an operator has a one-stop shop just to say, right, I want to do this I don't care what supplier it is, I just want to be able to do this certain promo. They don't want to have to go through 30, 40, 50 different back offices to be able to structure something, right? So fragmentation and common uptake of a specific type of promotion, I think, is super important. And operators have their own ability to do that now. You know, they never had that years ago. Now they have their own systems and wrappers around and things as well. So us tapping in as suppliers into their toolkits to get those innovations as well is important. But without a doubt, bonusing promo tools is a key component. but it has to tackle this fragmentation question to get the right ROI and spend on innovation there as well.
We got quite a few questions here, so I think before we get into that, though, I want to kind of ask each of you what your top kind of 3 predictions are for 2023. So, John, you're the lucky start.
I think there's going to be more collaboration between studios, collaboration between studios and operators. I think that's going to become more. There's going to be more helping each other to support each other, and sort of. I think in return for that, you're going to get more exclusive content, and hopefully content will get more exposure in return for that collaboration. I also think this non-traditional sector is going to expand. I mean, Slingo, obviously prime example of that, but there's the tap games I mentioned earlier, the crash games. There is definitely going to be a move towards that genre. I think that's going to start to take off. I guess in addition, I think that, well, I don't want to say something negative, but effectively, I think we're going to see a few studios disappearing. Either disappearing completely or merging or being acquired or what have you. So I think that's also going to happen quite a lot. So those are my 3 key predictions, I think.
Mark?
I mean, it's hard. I mean, John covers so much of it. But I mean, look, mine more generic. Look, we're going to see more innovation. I actually think we'll see some really cool brands in the market as well, licensed brands. I know we talked about it earlier, but I still think there is a desire to have that. I mean, actually, I didn't mention earlier, operators themselves are licensing brands, and they're ones which studios can work with. So I definitely think on that side. And it's not a prediction, but I'll be interesting this time next year to look back and see whether there are certain styles of games which are big in some markets and how they progress, with international operators to other markets as well. I mean, at the moment, it's still there is types of content which is similar in lots of different markets, and then there's some particular local products. It'd be interesting to see how that moves over the year.
Okay.
I would just quickly mirror John's M&A / economic trouble ahead for some. The market is too saturated. There isn't enough economics in the ROI for many studios, and the hope that a hit will come for some just won't, and there will be the net reality of that. I do think there is, and to some degree, if you look at the Relax and many other studios, like there is operator interest to be more self-determined in their own roadmaps and their own capabilities technically from a product building perspective. So I do think we'll start to see more operators take an active interest in their own exclusive content or own studio provisions internally. I think that will start to increase. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's just always interesting, and is if you look back in the last 10 years, the brands of the studio brands that were dominant or were leading the pack, how quickly that shifts, and it's becoming a lot quicker in terms of those shifts. I think, the 4 or 5 key names that were dominating the market, 5 years ago, almost where are they today? Even the brands that were 2 years ago were, they're the best thing. Well, are they on the decline? Are they as popular? And people are saying names of smaller studios now. Have you seen what they've done? So I think that's the nature of the business, right? But it also keeps us paranoid if you are in a decent position that you've got to stay relevant. You've got to keep trying. You've got to make sure that you don't rest on your laurels. But I do think we'll see a shift of the incumbents, let's say. And I think that will happen at a much more fast-paced rate, to be honest.
I think I really agree with that. I mean, I think one thing we are talking about innovation in new games, but maybe the innovation really needs to come down to how you run your business and how you produce slots. Yeah. One thing that we do that I haven't seen any other studio do. We actually produce like a prototype. We draw a very simple wireframe, and our devs, we can produce like a prototype within a couple of days, which we can play, and you can actually play and see if that format actually works. And from that, we can throw that away if it doesn't work and it's cost us hardly anything, or we can take it to the next level and then we add the maths to it and we see if we can balance the maths. And that's where we get something that's almost like there's something here. It feels right. There's a balance there, and then from the back of that, we can produce a game that we can be relatively confident that be successful.
I just, for the young studios amongst the audience, let's say, I can't compound John's point enough. Money Train 2, again, shameless plug, but Money Train 2 we have the same kind of prototyping tool, and I could say we played that with just numbers. There was no graphics. It was literally almost Stickman X, and we had 10 people literally enjoying playing essentially the outcome of a prototype. That's when you know as a studio you've got a bit of gold. If you could go, I'm super excited. I don't need the graphics. I don't need anything. I'm excited to see what happens in just pure proto form. Then you've got a bit of gold. Then that's something that you can build on. So my advisory point to any studio there is, if you're not excited about playing something in its rawest form, maybe think about whether you're going to spend invest your precious money into it. You've got to feel it. You've got to get excited by it. You've got to almost want to be around in a group of people, and people could see, what did you get? What did I get?
Absolutely.
That's so important.
Yeah, so much so that we actually, at the point now, we've got these like really basic prototypes, blocks and not even clip art, and we're showing that to operators, and we're getting operator buy-in at the point before you've even spent any money. Yeah. So you've got something that is a workable format, the maths balance, it's cost you relatively nothing, and you've got an operator saying, yeah, we want that, and we want it exclusive for X period of time. So that's the process we're going down, and it's working well for us. I mean, our next game we're going to launch, we'll launch at ICE, called Blockchain, is exactly that. It was actually an idea from one of our developers, and we thought that's a great idea. Draw something, create something. Within 48 hours, he came back to us with a prototype, and we all instantly loved it. And off the back of that, the maths have been really hard, but the maths work now, and we're really excited to start to show people. Yeah, I think that's got to be the way you've got to do it, because it's cost effective, and it gives you that confidence. And with the confidence, you and also you can get others to invest in it too.
I think it's important to note there, though, is a lot of times, because you develop yourself, even if it's numbers and boxes and things of that sort, especially when it's new, non-traditional content, you can fall in love with something because you get used to playing it, and your team gets used to it, and that might not necessarily represent the player base out there.
True, Tom, but I also think that's also part of the battle. I think if you're a studio, whether it hits or not, you've got to be passionate about what you're producing. 100%. I think you've got to be in the market. And when you talk to an operator with absolute conviction, you've got to say, I believe in this. And if it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. But the reality is, I get tired of people going out there and trying to sell games that they know intrinsically they're not passionate about. Yeah. Sometimes you've got to take a risk, but if you're passionate about it, that's half the battle. And operators will see that. They will see that passion, see that investment, and hopefully join you on that journey to try and see it and realize its potential. So I think it's value in itself, to be honest.
Yeah. And we all know, all four of us, that there's a lot more misses than hits. So learn from them, learn from them. Take that, sadly, take that back. Okay, we got quite a few questions here, so why don't I jump into a few of them here. This is from Kat. She's asking, when you go into an operator with new innovation, what response do you tend to get? And is there a discussion around risk versus reward for both parties?
I think from my experience, it's difficult to convince usually you speak to someone who manages the content. It's difficult to convince someone who's not familiar with the game format to really back it. I think content managers tend to be, certainly not all of them, a lot of them are not, but some tend to be risk averse. So if they see something that's unusual, and they're not, they won't back it. They will 9 times out of 10 go with something they're familiar with, a brand, a format, that they're familiar with, and it's a safe bet. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They'll promote that on their site. It will do relatively well because it's been promoted, and because it's a standard format, it will do okay. And it's just, it will just, that cycle continues. It's difficult to get the commitment. There have been unique circumstances where the content manager has really supported it and wants to go with it, and supports you all the way through. But from my experience, it tends to be more likely to focus on content they're familiar with.
I think I don't think we could talk about operators being a broad brush, as John mentioned. I think you, as a young, innovative studio, you need an operator sponsor, and typically that comes down from a casino manager or game content manager, or somebody who actually is a passionate player who understands the vision of the product and buys into it and is actually excited themselves. And hopefully that does well for them, and you could use that as a springboard. So I think, just to maybe Kat's point here, I think perhaps maybe the focus should not be on the broad brush. I think it's about finding one or two key operators that are going to buy your vision and going to endorse it, push you, and get behind it. And you can use that as a springboard, as a conversation to the broader market once a bit of confidence is built. That's how I would look at it.
Totally agree with that, Simon. Yeah.
Cool. We got a question here from Tom. Do you think there should be a deeper focus in the coming year on producing more games that are more attracted to the millennial audience, or do you think this will take a lot longer than the market would hope for?
I think we all just struggle to define what the millennial audience and market actually wants and needs, Tom, a little bit. I think it can mean a lot of different things in different fields. I think at the moment, it's not perhaps front and center of every studio's mindset about, I need to target the younger audience of the future. I think we'll, to want of a better word, I think we're mostly concerned about, are we all going to be profitable and growing in the course of the year, 18 months? So market shifts and demands will dictate that. Of course, our roadmaps are typically 6, 9 months, 12 months in advance. So you have to be cognizant of where the market will be a year down the line.
I think, I tend to agree, but I think also maybe Tom's point's more about, so Tom's talking about the studios producing the content that's focusing on the millennial, but maybe it needs to come down to the question of the operator. Is the operator willing to focus on the millennial? And also, if it is, needs to partner up and provide the content that supports that market. So I think it needs to have the operator fully on board to target the millennial, and then with the right studio partners, it can fulfill that prophecy. And I hope, I mean, there are examples, I'm hearing that's the direction it's going, but as to how quickly it will happen, I don't know.
And in kind of connection to that, I think this is a pretty interesting question from Mauricio. I hope I'm not killing your name here. I assume that younger cohorts for clients will be interested in more innovative games, but is there any evidence that younger demographics are indeed more interested in these games? I've looked for that information everywhere and I can't find it.
No evidence at the moment, from what I can see from our own data or even shared from operators, to support actually that they don't enjoy. Let's not forget, there's nothing saying that they don't enjoy the products we produce at this current point. So I agree.
Yeah. I think the question also is, are they actually even playing? Are they actually even trying? I mean, many of these younger, if you even in the early 20s, they might not even be bothering, so we don't know necessarily. Let's see here, we've got from Fernando. He's asking, what about skill games or PvP sessions? What do we feel about?
I think there are some good studios who've really tried to crack that mold. And people like Green Jade and those guys are really took a really bold move to try and tackle that segment. I think they probably had some good successes with some. I still think it's a bit hit and miss. Every time I personally have tried in the skill sector, I found that the audience there hasn't been as embracing, and the revenues therefore don't support the long-term investments. However, that segment could well be one of the future, could be one angle of going down that kind of more immersive experience. But I think it's a tough market at this point because I'm not sure the player base is there to support the investment, in just my humble view. But it might change dramatically in a few years.
I also think it needs to work within the regulation of the market you're in as well. It's not as simple as saying we're going to make a skill-based game. I mean, there are gambling regulations for a reason, and people should work within them, and that does constrain that a little bit. on the skill-based games.
Oh, it's massively even on distributions. You're right, Mark. Most skill games are defined usually by an operator-specific license, and most operators don't have that license. So when you might build a product that just generally, just by that virtue, can't get distributed far and wide. So yeah, it's a key point.
We've got a specific one for you here, Mark. And this is from Nicole. What type of players does Slingo appeal to? Is it good for recreational or sports players?
It's quite broad, actually, Slingo. I mean, traditionally, it's had the bingo element, and it's been a bit more recreational. Although we have got evidence of some of the sports betting operators using our product for cross-sell to their iGaming business, because there is player interaction with it. It's more of a game, which some sports betting people like. So yeah, we've had successes in both areas.
Okay, good. And we got a question here from Dan, and I'm just going to paraphrase it because it's quite long. But basically, how much does data play into our decisions, and how important is data for us?
I think I have a bit of a mixed feeling on that question. Actually, I from someone who has looked at almost every facet, a data point possible on game performance, it can tell you a lot. That's without a doubt, and can instruct the game design. However, I still think you can't put a price on gut feel and your own sense of enjoyment. I have made what on paper should be the most high performance top game in the industry game through data. Like it triggers every right touch point mathematically. It was the biggest flop I've ever launched, and a game that I just loved but didn't think would do very much, and it was red on all metrics. Was one of the best games that I've ever done. So I mean, it's important, but it shouldn't be your pure guide when it comes to developing a product. I think feel and a natural enjoyment is key.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, given for the smaller studios such as ourselves, we have very little in the way of data. If you don't have your own RGS, you don't have your own platform, you get very little in the way of data. So you have to go by gut feel. Friends, people in the industry, get them to play the content, get their feedback. I mean, I think that's as valuable as any data in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've had strangely a lot of success with data, but not always in game builds. When you're innovative and putting new mechanics, there's no data there. I mean, it's a bit like Simon and John have said, but then we've used the data once game's gone live to then help us present the game to other partners. Data is useful, we would do, and which ones have been more successful and less successful. It's useful also when speaking to partners and how what games are better for acquisition, which games are better for retention, and how you can work through that always. But it's like, I suppose this is a little bit more on the development side, but certainly we look at how the data of how games perform in different markets as well, to see which mechanics we think work better and how players are interacting with the games.
We definitely use a lot of data, but we use it for directional. It helps us to kind of give an idea, recognize trends a little bit earlier, but it also helps us kind of define who our actual customers are. And for us, we're doing a lot of new innovative stuff, so there is no real kind of data out there on this. Doesn't exist anywhere. So you kind of have to look at what you can to try and identify any kind of key metrics that might help you produce a better version of the next game as you evolve your innovation. So for us, it's been very valuable. All right, that's the end of the questions, and we're pretty much coming to end. Is there any kind of last words that anybody wanted to have before we close for the day?
Again, I spend more time now talking to younger studios, right? And I would just say, go with an open mind. Make sure that you have a passion for what you're going to do, believe in the product you're going to do it, but also have the common sense that it takes time, and that you make sure that you have resourceful pockets to give yourself the time to exercise your journey in that sense. But it is still possible, and there is still great rewards and great opportunity ahead.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing what you guys come with next. I'm sure ICE is going to be really exciting for us all. And you know, I'm looking forward to operators supporting innovation as we go forward.
Good stuff.
Thanks everyone.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Tom.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye.